Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Nicola Harding. Thank you for bearing with us for just a second. We've got quite a lot of people signed up today, so we'll be admitting quite a few people. So I'll just give it a minute for everyone to kind of get in and get settled and get comfortable. Hopefully you've got a nice brew or a cup of tea or coffee in front of you, or if you're anything like me, a can of Red Bull um, to get you through the next hour. Um, but I know that we're going to make it an enjoyable one for you. If you are new to us, my name is Dr. Nicola Harding. I am the CEO of We Fight Fraud. I'm also a criminologist, and I work with my team at We Fight Fraud to help prevent financial crime. I'm really delighted to be joined today by a really distinguished panel of speakers. We've got Stacey Blackwell from Skipton Building Society, Rich Bromley from Monzo Bank. I've got our own Andy McDonald, who is a senior advisor at We Fight Fraud, but formerly of a police leader, which you'll find out more about shortly. I've got Tony Sales, who again is one of the co-founders of We Fight Fraud, and you'll learn a little bit more about why he's here shortly. I'm also joined by Taavi Tamkivi, who is the CEO of Salv, and they've helped bring together this session, which is all about intelligence sharing to fight financial crime. A key phrase that I'm always saying, I'm sure my staff are absolutely sick to death of me saying it, but knowledge is armour, and it really, really is in this fight, because ultimately we can utilize tech and we can utilize, AI and all the different innovations that we're seeing across the fraud and financial crime space to help detect fraud, to help try and prevent it, and in some cases to help remedy it afterwards. But ultimately, knowledge and building not only our knowledge base, but that of our customers can be the biggest form of defence to ensure that that fraud doesn't happen in the first place. Now, talking about knowledge sharing in the industry itself, we often, when we talk about, intelligence sharing or working together, collaboration, these are key buzzwords that are being thrown around everywhere right now. And I think to an extent, there's probably a little bit of collaboration fatigue because people are saying we've got to collaborate and then it's not necessarily happening in this meaningful fashion that we need it to. And a lot of that is because there is a million one of excuses and reasons why we shouldn't be working together. Now, what I want to do today is give you uh, our expert opinions on, yes, there may be challenges, but here's the benefits that we can get out of it. And I'm going to start that by introducing you properly to Andy McDonald and to Tony Sales. Andy was formerly the head of special investigations at SO15 Counter-Terrorism Command and the UK National Terrorist Financial Investigation Unit. He was previously the head of the Metropolitan Police Fraud Squad at New Scotland Yard. And in an unlikely turn of events, he now works with Tony, who was dubbed as Britain's greatest fraudster. What I want to do is in their own words, allow them to tell you how they managed to come together in the shared goal of fighting financial crime in a bit of an interview that I've certainly seen before, but you guys definitely won't. So if you hold on tight, let's have a little look at how former head of the police tasked with sorting out fraud and financial crime ended up working with someone who was probably part of the reason his team existed.
So let's have a 2017 revisited. I'm Andy.
I'm Tony. Nice to meet you.
And how long did that conversation take to actually take place?
Oh, wow. It took a long time. It's taken a while, right? Because trust from both sides.
I'm Andy McDonald, Senior Advisor with We Fight Fraud.
I'm Tony Sales, co-founder and CIO of We Fight Fraud, also known as Britain's greatest ex-fraudster.
I spent 30 years working in law enforcement, in organised crime, fraud and counter-terrorism. I've spent the last 10 years working outside of policing, but still with people from the public and private sector to better understand all the threats that might face either individuals or organisations. I put a lot of that into practice with the other people I work with in We Fight Fraud. So if we go back to 2017, I think the way it went was that a commercial firm were asking you for a criminal perspective
Violation.
around fraud. And they got that from a criminal perspective from you.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, they were asking somebody who just retired as former head of this, that, and the other for a law enforcement perspective on how financial crime and fraud's investigated. Two very separate and different perspectives, not with any overlay or sort of meeting. And in fairness to them, it was one of them said, why don't you have a chat with this guy, Tony Sales?
Yeah.
My first impression was, what's Tony Sales ever going to tell me?
Yeah.
I've just spent 30 years doing that. I was head of this, that, and the other. What on earth could Tony? Quite frightening. It's probably fair to say when we first met that we thought it was coming from very different angles.
Yeah.
But it didn't take that long to say, I'm thinking about a problem in one way.
Yeah.
And you know what, you were just looking at it in a similar way, but perhaps a reversal. Yeah, I mean, I remember the eyebrows raising when I first introduced you as my friend now that I work with. But that's actually what it is. You said it's about trust. It's you think in one way because of your background. I think in a very different way. Yeah. But actually they do tend to point at the same issues. Yeah. That joint understanding, I think, has served us quite well. And when we're looking at some of the projects we do now, we go away, have a think about an issue, a challenge that we've been given or a task. You approach it from your way, I approach it from my way. And then we now understand we're probably going to come back and say pretty much the same things.
Yeah. After we always do that, don't we?
But I think it's taken us 6-7 years to understand that different perspectives really does help you with problem solving. Yeah. It's still culturally very difficult for some people to understand that. Yeah. Hopefully, if we keep chipping away, we can get people to work with us more, because the more people can get around the table, we get those different but very useful perspectives.
Now we've travelled the world together and you've put me on some great stages all around the place. And awareness and raising awareness is a big part of what both you and I do all the time, but also, you know, testing. We do a lot of testing, and you putting the little parameters around everything we do, I think really allows the testing to elevate and do stuff that other people just probably can't. We've got that criminal perspective, but then with your oversight and overlay, I think it allows us to tell that story to our audience that understand it much better.
So the testing for us has always been the challenge, you know, getting somebody to trust us to do it. Yeah. I think what we proved over the years that we've been doing it is that if we can sit with a client, get to understand what they think the issues are, we can go away and set those parameters. Actually, we know it comes out and works really, really well, not just for us, but for the client as well. We're lucky we've been able to push some barriers. And in terms of change, I think if you can change, almost anyone else can.
Yeah, I think that, like, I guess Nick says to me, you're still the only one. And I say there's loads that are, because I want to try and change others' lives from where I come from. You know that that's part of what I've always wanted to do. It's a long bloody journey. Like, it's long, fought with, you know, sometimes you know, no money, none of that stuff, and going through the hardships that I'm meant to go through that then allow you to work harder, because you have to work hard. Yeah. It's not like the criminal world where things come easy. This much harder this side, and you know, just even proving my integrity it was difficult. Yeah. So again, changing my behavior, just saying it different. You know, you putting your arm around me at certain times saying, don't say it like that. I know what you mean, but they're not going to hear it like that. Yeah. Think about how they're going to hear it, and just being able to change how I'm saying it, I think it's definitely impacted massively on how I talk even now, and how we can impact and create behaviour change for others going forward.
Has working together made you raise the bar when it comes to fraud prevention activities and what you do? Being pushed each other?
Well, I think obviously I come from a very mainstream approach, very traditional approach. You can't help yourself after 30 years, you think like a detective, and that will never go away. What it has done working with Tony is saying, yes, but. Yeah, I've worked in some very unusual policing environments as well, where we thought we could think like criminals. I've always said we can mimic criminal behaviour, but we definitely can't think like criminals. And working with Tony's definitely sort of reinforced that for me. Yeah, I know quite a few ways that criminals work. I say sometimes we can mimic them. All sorts of covert operations allow us to do things like criminals do. But there's no way that you can think like a criminal. That's a very human thing. It's a background thing. It's a social thing. And that's not what you automatically think about. So again, that different perspective has allowed me to think, I've come up with that, but I need to think about that other perspective.
Yeah, I guess the same for me. Like looking at things, like you always go back to the law says this. So like my brain set is all very much one way because it's always thinking about that risk and the need and the vulnerabilities and all that stuff that goes to creating who I am. But you've added in that level of that I just didn't have before, that I definitely, you know, it's a massive improvement. Like, and to do it, just to, you know, when we sat down in the very beginning, we know that people are going to raise an eyebrow. We know in both worlds, not just yours, in my world too. Yeah, like there's been death threats, there's been loads of stuff that's happened to me over the years, but I don't care because I know I'm definitely doing the right thing. And because of you, I'm able to see my life legitimately and what it means to be legitimate and actually be a decent, hardworking, honest person. Even though I've got this little bit of mad inside, I can actually live my life in that way. And life's improving because of that.
Plus your wife has phoned me up and give me a hard time.
Yeah. And that's important too, right? Is them, you know, having those relationships as well, where I remember you saying if you was with some whatever, then I definitely wouldn't want to be interested in working with you. But that becomes, you know, I'm married to a decent woman who has only ever tried to just make sure that I'm doing the right thing because she's a good person, like she genuinely is. So, you know, those relationships play into how we are as well. It's very important.
Once we started talking to each other, you don't just think about the one way of thinking. I might not be able to think it and understand it and think about it immediately, but I know somebody who can now.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing. You know, I spent 30 years of working with people like me. Same background, same perspective, same processes, same approach. Having the option, I can always say, yeah, thanks for your input, Tony, but no thanks.
Yeah.
But at least knowing that's in the background and saying, well, if I was going to be looking at this, I wonder what Tony would think about that. That's what's really valuable.
Yeah, and I guess that's what this is all about, right? Is about taking the perspectives of someone like me and making it understandable and desirable to the corporates that really need to know about it. You know, some of the insights that we give financial institutions, if you're a financial institution, must be quite a pretty amazing thing when you don't know something. So think of the recent social engineering one that I've done where I've got all the recorded bits and showing them the little, just even down to the hold music. You know, we're talking about this stuff long before it becomes mainstream and everyone starts to see it. So
yeah, we're not giving secrets away. That's why never giving law enforcement secrets away, as you know, I never would.
Yeah, never.
You're not giving away a load of criminal secrets, but you're just trying to make people more aware between us, saying that that's what the law says. The bad guys might be thinking about that. And if you put it all together, you might keep yourself a bit safer.
Yeah, and that's all either of us can hope for in the fight of, you know, trying to prevent what it is. It's the power of lived experience from both sides, you know, like from your perspective and from my perspective. Nick kind of brought that along and kind of solidified and cemented that and was able to put it into a line where we can just all point to them.
What we can show people is that by having different perspectives, by doing things in a certain way to understand that whole range of perspectives, we can get the behaviour change, which means for us, fraud and financial crime prevention.
Yeah.
I suppose the way I'd look at it is, if we can work together, anyone can.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, mate. And it's been, you know, it's a great working partnership.
I mean, I've worked with Tony and Andy now for an extremely long time, and it still amazes me that we're all sat here today doing what we're doing. And I think one of the things that I take from that definitely, and it is part of our practice, is it's not just about, you know, bringing together those different perspectives, which is really, really important. It's not just what you're doing in collaborating, it's how you're doing it and what that actually does, and the pathway that bridges into how, you know, the broader community can, in financial crime prevention, can work together. And often seen across battle lines, we've got to remember that you know, who we're fighting for in all of this and who we're fighting against. And ultimately, we're not financial institution versus financial institution. We're all of us against the criminals. So with that being said, I'd really like to introduce you to our full panel. So if they can come on camera, please, that would be amazing. I've got Stacey Blackwell from Skipton Building Society, Richard Bromley from Monzo Bank. Andy's here as well as Tony. So if you do have any questions for them following up from the video, and Taavi from Salv, who have been fantastic in helping us put this together and bring this discussion really, which I think, given everything that we've got going on at the moment, it's a really important discussion to be having, you know, like, not to preempt what we're about to talk about, but, you know, in just, 2 weeks time, pretty much, we've got, we've got a new piece of regulation that's coming into financial services, which means we absolutely have got to collaborate, right? Like, I don't know what, Stacey, Rich, if you want to come in and tell us your perspectives as the the financial institutions that are dealing with this at the sharp end, but like, what does collaboration mean for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all got October the 7th seared into our collective minds by this point. But I think it's a really, really good place to start, because I think fundamentally my principle is you're only going to really reduce fraud, disrupt and deter criminal activity through collaboration and through partnership. Otherwise, there are just too many organizations operating in silo. And when I say organizations, I'm not just speaking about financial services. When we think about APP fraud starts somewhere, and it typically starts via social media platforms, via online platforms, via telcos, and then we see the transactional activity to come into banking, and then we also see the money move from financial services into a myriad of different cash out points. So the only way you can really address this typology of fraud is via that kind of full ecosystem view. I'm really wary of also saying the same buzzwords around collaboration, how important, how vital it is, but it fundamentally is. And I think if we think about the banking sector, I think we've taken some good steps in recent years to share good practice across organizations in terms of how we see and how we spot risk and how we identify it and how we treat it. But that typically tends to be out of the moment, whereby you might be at a conference, a forum, and you're having a conversation with a different bank or a different PSB, and you're understanding, oh, you're seeing that risk from your perspective. That's interesting. I wonder if that risk has entered into our ecosystem. What we need to be able to really break through, and for this we do definitely need support from our regulators in the form of the FCA and the PSR, is how do we collaborate in the moment in a much more consistent basis? I.e., how do we make sure that all organizations are speaking the same language when it comes to fraud and data? Because that's one of our biggest challenges. Like, walk into any organization across, I think we've got a good few hundred people on this call. Every single organization will look at their data slightly differently when it comes to fraud. So that ability for us to be able to speak that same data-led language and actually share pertinent data at the right in the moment point to manage that friction against actually preventing fraud is the absolute key to all of this. And I think when I think about October, and I know you folks at We Fight Fraud did a fantastic webinar on this on the documentary last week, is first party fraud, right? Organized first party fraud is going to be a significant challenge for industry to head into. Now, every organization will say they've taken steps to design out that particular risk and to make sure they're ready. Monzo very, very much being in that camp. But the only way to really disrupt that organized crime is through that collaboration and is through that proper level of data sharing. So sorry, I know I've got off on maybe a few different tangents there, but what it's demonstrate is, I think from an industry perspective, we've invested significantly in reducing fraud, in reducing money muling. But I think if we want to step change in terms of actually reducing the macroeconomic causes individuals, obviously pointing out the fact that not all fraud is just financial impact, is that impact on people's well-being. We can only really step change into that through an ecosystem and a framework which allows us to share data that's very, very pertinent. Stacey, anything you'd add to that from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything you've just said there, Rich. We're all, nobody in financial services is arguing that genuine victims should be reimbursed if they're the victim of a scam. Absolutely agree with that.
I think we do just have to be mindful that scams don't very often originate in a bank or building society. They tend to originate elsewhere, and then the money moves through the financial system, as you've said. I think it's really crucial that, you know, organisations like us, a bit like Andy and Tony, we come at this from very different perspectives. You know, Skipton offers savings accounts, you offer current accounts, very different perspectives. You're a completely tech bank. We have branches and, you know, serve a much different demographic. But yeah, absolutely, we have been able to collaborate and will continue to do so. But we need to have better, easier mechanisms for doing that. What's going to be interesting when this goes live is there are mechanisms being put into place for us to talk to each other about cases and have a directory of users that we can talk to in different organisations. What's going to be interesting is just how practical that actually is and how quickly we can speak to each other, because time is of the essence. And in my experience, working in counter fraud and trying to talk to some of the bigger banks, it can be a massive, massive problem. So I think the speed at which we can talk to each other is just as crucial as whether we collaborate at all.
I totally agree with that. And if I could just very, very quickly come in, I think that's where essentially we need to take that human element out of the loop. Because if fundamentally we had the data and the channels and the ecosystem to be able to say, Rich, you're making a payment to Stacey. Stacey opened up that bank account a day ago. It looks a little bit dodgy and a bit suspicious. Actually, I can take the right steps to protect my customer in that particular instance. I think at the moment, a lot of the stuff we do is actually after the fact, which is fantastic, because fundamentally it still means that we are collaborating to try and prevent further fraud and financial crime, but it's too far up the funnel. We need to bring it right up to the top of the funnel, because that's where you really can make that kind of marked difference.
Just on that, and on the same thing, a question for you both in the chat: is collaboration with other financial institutions a part of your current daily processes? And like, if so, how are you managing that then if we've not got these kind of, you know, robust ways of doing it, I guess? Carrier pigeon, or how's it going?
we do have mechanisms already in place. So various memberships allow us to share data in a really secure way, but they are limited. You know, there's only so much that you can share over those portals. So yeah, it is definitely something. We're probably more mature than other industries, I would say, at data sharing in terms of fraud prevention, but there's more to do. So there are mechanisms, there are memberships like SciFast, for example, that we can utilise and talk to each other through those mechanisms, but it relies on membership. So the more people who are members, the better. And it might be that the bank you want to speak to isn't a member, in which case you've got to find another route to speak to them. So yeah, it happens every day, but it can be a big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely same from, sorry, Nick, I was going to say absolutely same from a Monzo perspective. And I think this is why we need to kind of turn that dial from that after the event notification, like via a BPS portal, for example, to notify Skipton that an account has received potentially fraudulent funds, to actually how do we reduce it in that kind of in the moment.
Yeah, that I was going to kind of bounce this over to Taavi as well, because you created the AML and fraud teams at Wise, didn't you, that led the compliance function there, and then used your kind of lived experience to create Salv, I guess, to address the needs of what Stacey and Rich are talking about. So I just wondered, like, is this something that you were also, you know, some of the challenges that you were having at Wise as well then?
Yes, thank you. It was, I was just thinking about I joined Wise 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and I was actually initially super shocked how much manual work we had to do around AML, fraud detection, compliance, KYC. We physically onboarded, virtually onboarded customers by visually checking the documents. I was downloading sanction lists from OFAC and UN with my little hands and uploaded them into the central servers. But also, very shockingly, my fraud team guys, they were physically making calls they were searching phone numbers from some US banks, and they were trying to call to the US banks fraud teams and give them heads up that actually there is some fraudulent proceeds. APP fraud term wasn't there yet, but actually fraud was still there. The proceeds are hitting the US banks. And literally the people on the other side, they just dropped the call because they didn't want to hear anything about the suspicion, because there was no discipline, there was no standard, there was no agreement how this collaboration should happen. And that was like super shocking to me, for me to show how much human intelligence was wasted due to these manual processes which were not optimized. And now, like 10 years later, I see that, okay, these problems are still there, but actually different technologies can help to improve a little bit, at least, this kind of like manual dummy work and replace automate sanction list checking massively. And same with intelligence sharing as well, like fraud fighting teams, but also AML teams are now literally able to create joint cases or joint investigation cases where they're not only talking to each other, but actually they are using virtual platform to exchange data points, intelligent data points, which is like massive change over the last 10 years, when back then it was just random phone call and then was like drop the call and that's it. Whereas now, where I see that countries full of banks and fintechs are using platforms like ourselves to collaborate on day-to-day basis around the fraud cases and the AML cases. So that has been already good progress, but I don't have any doubt that actually this progress continues massively.
But when we talk about information and data, obviously all of it's really, really valuable. And I think the first thing that people go, particularly if you're in the UK, is like, oh, data, GDPR, like we can't, the regulations and stuff. Like, what, for Rich and for Stacey, like what information and intelligence do you want to share? And actually, is it so tightly guarded that you can't share it, or is it more about having the mechanism to share it?
It's a great question. I think sorry, I was going to say, I think fundamentally there is the legitimate interest under GDPR, which this firmly is. There is legitimate interest to share data that's pertinent to the prevention of fraud. I think what Pay.UK have demonstrated via a couple of proof of concepts in recent years around their enhanced fraud data and fraud overlay concepts is that when banks do share real-time information at the point of a payment being entered, that's when you can have a real marked impact on reducing fraud. So kind of maybe going down a level deeper. If I'm making a payment to Stacey, for example, and at that point the payment is about to be processed, I can understand more about the receiving account, and also from Stacey's perspective, they can understand more about the sending account, actually be able to amalgamate those data points in real time allows us to be super effective. Now, I think there's always been some nervousness around some of the level of data we're talking about here, because obviously a lot of it is personal, identifiable information, and therefore there is that degree of discomfort. But actually, through the regulators, the PSR put this in their set of regulatory measures around PSR, that they wanted to open up intelligence sharing. Just last week, I think Andrea Bow mentioned her keynote that collaboration and intelligence sharing is the key to all of this. So I feel like the ability is there. The difficulty is being able to find a consistent centralized framework where we're all speaking the same data language, and then we're applying that data in a controlled, safe way to kind of de-risk any of those concerns. And that's why we do need regulatory intervention, because only really a regulator can stand up that kind of framework wide level of data sharing. Outside of that, you're quite reliant on the different vendor partnerships you might enter into, which obviously won't have a critical mass of industry, because different firms for different reasons will partner with different vendors. So still super important for industry, but if we want to push through, it has to be that kind of centralized framework where we can all make sure we're on the same football pitch, excuse the sporting analogy. We're all operating by the same rules, and therefore we're able to use that data in a pertinent way, which reduces that potential harm of that data being potentially misused.
Do you want to add anything, Stacey?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's really interesting. I'm actually meeting with some representatives from the ICO later on today, and straight off the back of this, one of the questions they want to ask me is how much more would we want to share data, and how would we do it? So, you know, this is something I've talked about for a really long time. We have to be a little bit more bold in the way that we share data if we're going to get as fast as or faster than the criminals, because they really don't care about any regulation. They are not interested in playing ball. They just do what the hell they like. And whilst we absolutely want to stay right within the realms of the law, that's the right thing to do, we have to get smarter and bolder at this and make sure that we are sharing where we can, where it's appropriate, to prevent fraud. I think most of the public, unless they're a criminal, would agree that sharing that data so we can prevent fraud is a worthwhile endeavour.
Taavi, did you have response?
Just wanted to add to that is actually, when we read the laws, like economic crime bill in UK, or like in EU, there is like new AML regulation coming out. Then in the laws, they clearly say the conditions, or define the conditions when you can exchange and what kind of data. So that's where the crime fighting laws are helping, are working in conjunction with the GDPR regulations. And that's really eye-opening. I really encourage everyone to read the laws, actually. It's not rocket science, it's like human understandable thing. I think the main thing which makes it difficult actually for the regulated entities is that usually, like, we are doing things because it's mandatory by the law, like we need to do it. In this intelligence sharing and collaboration, that's not mandatory yet. It will become mandatory, I'm pretty sure, but this is like voluntary activity. This is allowed, but not mandatory. And then the discussion starts like, if it's not mandatory, why do you need to do that? Like your TPOs are asking or CISOs are asking. That's where the internal justification needs to happen, but not, please don't beg regulators to make it mandatory, because I'm afraid that this will make things worse, actually.
Rich, do you have a...
Yeah, just to add on to that, I mean, I understand the argument for making things potentially worse by a regulatory direction, but I think sometimes a directive is needed to actually push everyone into where they need to be. It's just nature of the beast. I think only thing I was going to mention is we just have to look out to Australia. Look how Australia are tackling APP fraud and scams. They're taking a very balanced, sensible view of bringing all the right sectors into the scope of a piece of regulation, which means that every single sector which has skin in the game actually has incentive to address that fraud problem across the value chain. We're not quite there yet in the UK, but I think fundamentally we should have a look at actually how other people are doing this.
I mean, obviously there's cross-border kind of issues, and just a little plug, we're actually writing a white paper on cross-border APP fraud at the moment. So if you would like to comment, Rich, I'll be in touch. But just thinking about, like, even within the boundaries of the UK, and this is one for you, Andy, there's been a couple of comments around kind of the police's use of the banking protocol to report fraud trends that they're seeing to UK finance, who then communicate it to the heads of financial institutions. But, like, how do we ensure not just data and intelligence sharing from amongst financial institutions, but, like, what about, the financial institutions aren't the only stakeholders in this? What issue is it for law enforcement?
Well, hello everyone. It's great to be with you, and I've finished wincing looking at the documentary that Tony and I did there. Don't like watching myself or hearing myself, but it's been really interesting listening to the guys here, because me talking to Tony was all about collaboration and partnership. It's an unusual one, and before I retired, I know Stacey knows this because she was part of it all. I've been looking at one of my presentations to the British Banking Association in 2013, talking about collaboration, how we should all be sharing public to private sector. We're now over 10 years ago, and at the time we said we're going to get on with it. And guess what the biggest problem is? We haven't got on with it. And yeah, there are challenges, but really what collaboration and data sharing and working together is all about is trust. And that was tricky in the first instances, but I think we've gone way beyond that. I'm very happy that the private sector is trustworthy to work with from a law enforcement perspective. That isn't always reciprocated, and that's tricky. Has been for ages, will continue to be. We do know that some types of data is difficult to share, but there are gateways out there. The gateways just aren't the excuse anymore. Unfortunately, sometimes this comes down to capability and capacity. The private sector has put lots and lots of effort and resource and money into making sure that they do have the people, systems and processes and tech to gather all this data, make some sense of it and share it when they need to. Unfortunately, that's not always, again, the case in law enforcement. So it tends to be a bit of a one-way system. And when we're looking to make sure that everybody in a public-private sector partnership, which was a lot to do with before I retired, is sharing what they can. It's pretty much a one-way street. Considerably better than it was 10 years ago, but we're still very reliant on the private sector on top of their day job, on top of their business of actually making a profit for their company, to make sure that the right information is there so that everybody can share, so that the right people can understand, manage and mitigate the risk. And that sometimes is about, as Richard and the guys were saying, maybe we need to take that step to say we need to go a bit further. That's probably the challenge. Is we know what's doable. We do know what the laws are. They're not perfect, never are, and we'll have to constantly tweak the laws. But the framework is in place to ensure that the public sector is working with the private sector to do what they can. I think the PSR directive that we've been a lot to do with in the last couple of weeks is a really good example of this. We've already found out with 2 weeks of research that it's probably not going to be perfect, and it probably will need tweaking. But at least they're getting on with it. And I think this is the key. You have to take these steps. You have to go beyond the theory. And there are some great people out there, both in the public and private sectors, that are trying to make it happen. Sometimes there are just hurdles put in place, and sometimes you have to just trust the people that you're working with to take that extra step. So that probably actually didn't answer your question, Nick, but which you might have to remind me of in a second. But I just wanted to say that about partnerships. We have for ages now, we've been talking about getting the right partnerships. Lots of them are out there. Unfortunately, some of them tend to be very qualitative. We actually work together a lot better. Quantitative, i.e. making a difference and coming up with results, is what's really important. And this is all about protecting victims. It's protecting victims from fraud. It's about protecting communities from money laundering and illicit finance. And actually, financial crime is pretty much the same, whatever typology you're looking at. So you can apply the same collaborative principles as long as they're in place and everybody understands what they're supposed to be doing, and you will get some good results. So if there's still a question there, you better remind me, but otherwise perhaps let somebody else speak.
I think you've pretty much covered it, Andy, so thank you for that. Taavi, have you got a response?
Just wanted
your
to
hands up. Yeah.
Just wanted to echo back, Andy really focused on the trust aspect, which is important. Inside of each organization, trust can be built internally, but actually within the organizations, inside of the private sector, but also between private and public, the trust building is something that we've seen that if done well, then actually it encourages people to use whatever platform they have for collaborative investigations. And these are like simple tricks like lunch and learns, like getting agents together into the same room physically, getting some public sector people to speak to them, getting exciting public sector people actually, sharing some numbers like as t-shirts, like trends showing up and down, and doing it regularly. And it really works. It builds trust amongst the community, and then they are willing to share and exchange intelligence way more than without this trust. And it's doable.
The cops are always exciting, Taavi, don't but this was Tony and I,
you, Andy.
actually sitting two very different people down that would never trust each other normally to work at. Can we actually work together? And not straightforward initially, but I always introduced Tony as my friend before I introduce him as the person I work with now, because we became, we actually trust each other, and that's the most important to both of us. I know that, as well as the odd bit of work that we do. And it is tough sometimes, and you're right, there are mechanisms to do it, normally facilitated by the private sector, I hasten to add, but yeah, you're right.
One of the things that often comes out of this idea of trust, though, isn't it, is around competitive advantage. And that's one of the things that's thrown around in terms of data sharing. And personally, I think that if the term competitive advantage is being used as a barrier to prevent fraud, then what has the world come to? I guess for me, and maybe it's time to hear just a little bit from Tony about this, is on the ones with the competitive advantage in collaboration, the criminals, Tony?
The thing is, for me, you could stop it. And I ask every time, I'm like, why don't they just do it? Like, I don't get it. Like, the criminals are sharing it every moment of every day. Yeah, it just depends what crime group you're in. Yeah, if you're not in my crime group, go away. I'm sharing it in my lot. Yeah, and this is what the silos still exist in that world, right? But once they've got all their moves, they can just crack right on and stop messing about. And like, it just seems, one of my first ever presentation, I said, the problem is you lot don't talk to each other. And it's not just banking, it's not just fintechs. It needs to be everyone. HMRC, banking, government, Facebook, Insta, everyone, yeah, it needs to, and we can't blame them for it, because we're saying that, you know, if I'm them listening to all these scams originate from social media, I'm gonna go away. Don't want to be near you lot because you're trying to blame me. Yeah, the reality is the people on social media put their information on there that allow old Tonys to find out more about them and then start to whack them on the phone or to socially engineer them through the computer, right? Awareness is key to all of this. There is no one fix that's going to fix all of it. And I think that, you know, Andy was part of the digital ID for the UK, right? Now, if we want to get to a place where we have to really secure what we're going to become, we have to understand all the vulnerabilities and the flaws, because by doing that, getting all of those people in the chain, we have to understand who are they and what do they know about the crimes that can affect them and the people that they're dealing with. Yeah, because one breaking one part of the chain, I'm taking all the information and doing exactly what I want with it and putting it back, and no one is going to be any of the wiser. So it's really important. You know, I think the best thing that came out of We Fight Fraud North for me was seeing Richard and Stacey sitting in that side room just talking. Yeah, because it's the most simplest of human things that we can do. And why are we not, you know, we only do it at conferences and other places. We've just got to get more vocal in talking about it to each other.
I have to say, Rich and Stacey, both Tony and I made that same observation, and it was in part why we decided to come together to do this discussion now, was actually seeing you two and the kind of in-depth conversations that was, some of it we were party to and others we weren't, but just actually seeing it genuinely, because it showed that collaboration wasn't just a buzzword, it was a really meaningful thing for both of you, and that kind of spurred us on to go, actually, you know what, let's throw the old you know, fraud and financial crime jargon out the window and actually get to the root of what it looks like in practice. And I think, you know, it's essential, but it is really, you know, it's a complex thing, and we're not going to unfortunately solve it in the next 18 minutes that we've got left on here, but there are some more questions, so I'll try and put them to you, and apologies if I don't get to them all. I will try and bring them together as much as possible. But while collaboration between banks and fintechs hold immense potential, what are the primary barriers that currently hinder more widespread partnerships? I guess you've kind of identified a lot of them already, but is there anything else that you want to add around some of the kind of barriers to actually having these more meaningful partnerships, or a call to action that you'd like to request?
I'd probably slight call to action. I think we've probably touched on quite a few points so far, but I think, again, if we reflect back on the directive from the payment systems regulator, they had 3 measures. Measure 2 of that particular regulation was to task industry with improving intelligence sharing. I think we've done an awful lot of work on it around the proof of values, the proof of concepts. I think what we haven't done, very much to Stacey's point, is be bold and brave enough to push through it and actually make sure we can get it done. Now, there are reasons for that. Obviously, we started the call by speaking about October the 7th and readiness for the new regulations. It's pretty fair to say that a good chunk of the fraud prevention community in the UK has been working full steam and flat out ahead to make sure we're all ready to collectively serve customers by day one. We need to double down on prevention. That's the only way we can solve it. That's similar to what Stacey mentioned earlier. Whilst I'm absolutely all for the principle of reimbursing innocent victims of APP fraud, what it doesn't do is stop money going into the hands of criminals. Until we do that, nothing's going to change. So my call to arms is around that measure 2, and I know there'll be a number of people on this call who attend workshops with Pay.UK, with the PSR, etc., is to double down on that voice around prevention, because if we do that collaboratively and collectively, we will push through that door. And once we push through that door, we will see a marked impact in the UK.
Absolutely. Taavi, you got?
Yeah, I would add to that, like, it's what I've seen is lack of will or lack of initiative, basically, because it's easy to bring up excuses like legal, security, business case, usability, neighbors are not doing. But I've seen that actually when a bank or a fintech really faces the problem and there is internal leader who wants to fix this problem, then they will tell that, okay, please bring these 3 companies into the network because I want to communicate with them, and then it happens. So it's like personal power to do something. Again, it sounds like a soft thing, but that's literally the only thing that the organizations are missing, nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely. Stacey, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of add there about, so we've got several obligations as I see it in financial services. The collaboration piece goes without saying. I'm a real advocate for us sharing where we can and what we should, freely, openly and boldly, like I've said. I think the other thing is when you think about prevention, we've got a huge part to play in educating the public about what these kinds of scams look like. I know most organisations that I talk to have got some sort of scam awareness stuff on their website. They do social media posts. We're trying to talk to the public. I think we've got to continue with that. I've got one of my colleagues currently in our London branch talking to the public directly about scams and how to avoid them. So we've got to up the ante there and actually get to speak to these people as much as we can by whatever channel we can. And I think we, in the prevention space, going back to collaboration, we do have to think about Rich's point around data sharing in the moment of a transaction happening. How much can we tell each other about the customer that we have? How confident are we that our KYC has been adequate to know our customer well enough to say, actually, this guy could be a bad guy, or no, I've got everything I need on this person. They're definitely who they say they are. They're transacting as I expect them to because I've asked them that question. The money that they're putting into their account or moving through their account seems reasonable given their occupation. That is another piece of work that we need to make sure we get absolutely bob on. And it's not always easy because the public have a perception about KYC that they don't know it as that. What they know is you're going to ask me a load of stuff I don't necessarily want to tell you. So we've got to educate the public that that is part of this whole thing. We need to know you well enough to be able to say what you're doing looks unusual or not. And that can be really challenging. So we've got several obligations, I think. It starts with educating the public, prevention, collaborating then to make sure that our information that we've got on our customers is brilliant and we can say for sure this transaction's okay or it's not.
Yeah, Rich?
I just wanted to double down on that point around education, because I think we all do this very, very well intentionally, is every single organization will provide fraud awareness, education, red flags, warning signs. I see some of this stuff come through with other accounts that I have. Sorry, Monzo, I'm not just you. But fundamentally, you become desensitized to it. So you're just seeing screen after screen after screen after screen of messages you've seen probably 10, 15, 25 times before. So when that screen is actually pertinent to stopping you in the moment from falling victim to a fraud, you are too far down the road to be desensitized by it. And to Tony's point earlier, you've also got a fraudster potentially on the phone speaking to the victim and engineering them through those particular screens. So I think there's a whole piece of work around how we better do that in the moment and provide customers with actual tangible tools to be able to understand if they are potentially at risk. But on the educational point more broadly, it's getting it into schools, which I know is an easy soapbox thing for me to say, but fundamentally, if we're educating in schools around finances, around scams, around what might happen if you do allow your account to be used for muling purposes, for example, then it does become a deterrent and it becomes a cultural deterrent. And that's one of the issues with fraud and money muling today. If you go onto TikTok, I haven't got TikTok, I'm far too old, but when my nephew shows me TikTok, he can so easily get to posts which are basically talking about making money. Now he's just turning into his teenage years. Thankfully, I'm saying don't do any of this, but it's so easy, and because there isn't that deterrent of I'm doing something wrong, because culturally it's acceptable. Then that's the issue we need to break, and that can only be broken through a proper education network.
TikTok's my guilty pleasure, Rich. So you're talking to the converted there. I swear to God, I don't know where I've learned more about crime from, Tony Sales or TikTok. I just trust.
I mean,
Tony
maybe
more.
that's where we go with these social media platforms, right? Maybe that's the point, is to, okay, so it's originating from there. How do we bring them to the table to start looking for what this looks like for them? You know, how do we pull out all of these posts? It must be really difficult, right, guys, for them to be able to pull a post when they're getting billions of them every day, yeah? There must be a knowledge pool within what we all know, and everyone that's connected, going back to the public and private sectors working together stuff. How do we get everyone plugged in and start drilling down into those really important facts that we all know that cause the fraud, and then we start to see it on the back end, you know, like that. I think could be a really good way of doing it. Like, we just have to, it's definitely about educating them as well about the information. I've thought many times about how privacy, we get the choice on social media to set our privacy. Yeah, it should be clear, made clear to the people when they're doing it. It's in the T's and C's, but it's not clear when you're actually signing up of what could happen because of. And I think that they're improvements that we make on those social media sites that then start to get down, you know. But going back to Richard's point, we don't then want to get into a place where they're just seeing messages. So it's the round and round again, you know. We're back in that same loop. So
I think it's the collaboration for me has to happen on all counts. You know, the obviously sometimes collaboration and all jumping in one egg basket can go too far. I mean, not to be critical of the government, but stop thinking, what about fraud? You know, there's sometimes messages can try and hit everyone at all time, and they can just become too generic. You've got to be impactful and meaningful for the individual, but actually having a joined up approach and saying, you know what, I mean, we've got obviously crooks that we do around young people and scams, and university students and things like that, and it's a national campaign at the moment, but getting universities and banks on board to say, look, this is a joined up message you can all get behind. Sometimes the actual, you know, backbone of it is they go, well, we didn't think of it first, so therefore we don't want to champion it, or we don't want to align with this, that and the other, and that's unfortunate, because there's a whole, you know, there's a power in campaigns. Think about all the stuff from when you were kids about how to cross the road, or all of those kinds of things. So I think collaboration in terms of information sharing is as important as collaboration on getting behind the messages. Taavi?
And this discussion reminds me of the old knowledge that like fraud fighting is like a cabbage, or like a different layer. So basically you need to have this awareness and training and technology and payments. But quite often, like, I'm getting questions from the banks that why don't you bring telcos or social media companies into the networks of theirs? And of course I would love to do that, but actually I see that there's like a mental barrier, as you said also, Nicola. It's like they don't, like, telcos don't want to work too closely together with the banks, and vice versa maybe as well, and they want to sort out their things on their own. But there are things that we can control. This community here we can control within our own remit, like getting our banks and fintechs to work together. That's fully under our control, and we don't need to wait for telcos to come in, or Minister of Education to come in, actually. So I prefer to focus on that opportunity we have on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, working together just has to be more than more than just financial institutions, but more than just words. And Toby's made a comment saying there's a pity there's no cheap way of having a conference and getting private and public bodies to talk to each other, especially about how public finances are. Zoom and Teams are good, but it'll never be good as having a chat and a handshake and a coffee. And I'll just publicly state that's kind of why We Fight Frauds here. We do regular meetups. We Fight Fraud North, where Stacey and Rich were, is, you know, they're free to attend events. We do them online and we do them in person, and it's all about that. How do we get the right, you know, knowledge and intelligence and share the kind of latest innovations, but get together and actually talk and make that happen. So and shameless plug, we have actually got one on Wednesday for board games. So there's a few spots left. If people do want to attend and you're in London, please come and be my guest and see what that actually looks like firsthand. But before we're kind of rapidly running out of time, and I'm sure you don't want to hear my voice over and over. So what I want to do is turn it back over to our panel here and just say, if there's one last thing to think about in terms of kind of intelligence sharing and how that knowledge can be as armour, is, you know, either a comment or a call to action. What would you each do? And I'm going to start with Stacey, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much. So I think my call to action is really about being bold. I think you need to speak to your data protection officer, speak to your compliance team, speak to your legal team, really push the point around public interest, legitimate interest. The public is interested in solving fraud, so they want us to share information to do that. We're just being very cautious about it, understandably, because sharing is challenging if you do it in the wrong way. You know, nobody wants to be in a space where you overshare or share something they shouldn't have done and it causes somebody detriment. but we have to get bolder. So my call to action is that people need to have that great conversation with their relevant people in their organisation and be more bold.
Brilliant. And if I hand it over to Rich, what would your call to action be?
I think it's to talk. Just to use my own experience, one of the reasons why I attend quite a few of the different events that kind of go on across the UK is because I want to put my face out there. I want to speak to people. I want to speak to other fraud and financial crime leaders. I want to understand what they're seeing in their neck of the woods. I want to understand what they're doing well and potentially what we could do better. So my call to action would be definitely try and make the right events. We Fight Fraud events are definitely the right ones to attend. A shameless plug for you all. But I think it's sometimes quite difficult and quite challenging when you go into these rooms for the first time and maybe you don't know too many people and maybe you're a bit nervous about going and saying hello. You've got quite a few faces on the screen now who do attend quite a few events. So please do attend. Come and say hello to us because fundamentally we're all here for the same reason. And that's what fraud and financial crime fighting is all about, right? We're all here for that same reason. So yeah, that'd be my call to action.
Brilliant. Andy, can I come to you?
You called me out there, Nick. Yes, sir.
Sorry, love.
When you're thinking about working in the partnerships, yes, we all know it's great. Echoing really what Stacey and Richard said so far, trust's going to be key. You might have to take that extra step that's sometimes a bit uncomfortable, but it's about information sharing. There is loads of data out there. Ask yourself, do you actually need it all? Do you have to have everything? No, you don't. You can be a bit specific about that. But how are you going to access it? How are you going to share it? The legality piece with my police head on is sometimes you cannot share stuff. It might be the mechanism whereby you've obtained that information. It could be from a sensitive source. Sometimes you simply can't share information straightforwardly, but please share as widely as possible. And of course, again, with the old law enforcement head on, if you are concerned about something, either working in your own organisation or working together as a partnership, and it doesn't look right, please make sure you report it. The one thing that law enforcement does rely on is people reporting concerns and suspicion. That's always going to be important. It must get into the system, so that's going to be important too. But yeah, I think that's probably it from me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. And I guess that leads nicely into Taavi really, and what you guys at Salv have tried to do really is give us that platform to be able to make sure that data that is shared is legal and ethical, right? So if I hand over to you, Taavi.
Yes, my recommendation is that start small and then scale. Like for me as a startupper, like it's very natural to do it because like it's just you need the other counterparty institution. You don't need the whole banking sector around you. Like first is like what is the bank or what is the fintech that you actually see as the biggest partner that you would like to communicate with. Then pick the one case, like what's the case that you're currently investigating where you could gain extra information or share extra intelligence with other institution. Focus on this one partner bank, one particular case, and then find the like legal basis to exchange the information. Yeah, you can use our platform, of course, I would be happy, but actually you don't need. You need just the discipline. You need to read through the law, Economic Crime Bill, Data Protection Act, and you'll be able to exchange information. And then you can get the really quick wins really fast and see material evidence that, wow, I'm actually able to resolve this case thanks to the colleagues on the other side. That wow effect will actually boost further growth of this collaboration.
Brilliant. Yeah, good practical advice there, Salvi. And just I left you till last, Tony, because no doubt you're going to scare us all to death. So what have you got to say on this?
Well, I just think that maybe just removing silos internally and talking to everyone in the business, yeah, and understanding, just getting those relationships internally and forcing them down into the teams internally can really help that tech that's great with great human intervention in the background become something really powerful. Like me and Andy always say, criminals just cut straight to the chase. Yeah, they don't have to go through all the tick box and the red tape rubbish that everyone else has to suffer. So giving yourself the best opportunity by talking internally to everyone that you've got is going to be a great defend back against it in a human way. So not too scary, Nick.
Oh, good. Thank you. Going easy on me on a Monday afternoon. So Thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Stacey, Rich, Taavi, Andy, and to Tony. Thank you for coming and sharing this with us today. It's been really, really interesting, even though I have the benefit of all of you guys for a lot of the time. As always, you just have a lot to offer. And the call to action that I would say is, please do keep engaging with us. As Lucy's popped in the chat and I've shared as well, We Fight Fraud and Salv collaborated together on an ebook that talks about APP fraud and the processes. Please do go and download that. Take a look at the documentary that We Fight Fraud did with the Payments Association on APP fraud, and think about how all of this is that call to action to say, hey, we've got to start doing this now, because October the 7th is coming quickly, and even though there's been a lot of changes, it doesn't look like a date change will be one of them, although I'm always happy to be proven wrong. So please do reach out to us if there's anything we can help you with at We Fight Fraud, and we look forward to seeing you at future events and within our community. So thank you again to our speakers, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.